Rewire. This is Rewire, the podcast that invites tech leaders to share their moments of becoming. I'm your host, June Sarpong, and I'll be chatting to the people in tech who have the power to make real change. This series is brought to you by GSMA. Rewire. Today we are here at 4 years from now, and I'm joined by Duncan Clark, head of Canva Europe, who transitioned from being a data journalist to making the decisions at one of the biggest, fastest growing software companies in the world. Not only did he make the jump from writer to entrepreneur, founding his own storytelling platform Flourish in 2018, but he did so while trying to help as many people as possible understand the world around them. And it's all about data. Hello, Duncan. How are you?
I'm very well. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you here. Well, of course, we are at WMC, the World Mobile Congress. Now, how did we manage to find a quiet room amongst all the commotion going outside?
It's certainly a lot of commotion. I tried to find a room for an interview and there were none available.
Well, you came to the right place. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I'm fascinated about your story, because it's quite a unique one to go from journalist to entrepreneur and then actually be bought and then be running one of the fastest growing companies in the world. I want to know how you became so fascinated with data in the first place. What's your origin story?
So I guess my origin story is just being quite high in curiosity. I got into journalism via publishing. And
what were you doing in publishing?
I was doing book publishing and editing, originally in sort of non-fiction books around the world, things like books about climate change, things like that. And what I found interesting about book publishing was that it was about going deeper into a particular topic. And when I arrived in journalism, I found it fascinating the way it all connected to everyday life and the kind of drumbeat of new news. But I actually found myself craving less of the newness and more of the kind of getting to the core of the issue.
Yeah.
And that's what led me into data journalism, where it's about understanding the world through facts and figures rather than just being the first to understand what happened in Whitehall that day or whatever. So
do you find that when you're sort of so focused on the data, does it take the emotion out of it at all?
I don't think so. I mean,
or does it make you even more connected? What do you think?
I think it's an ingredient in understanding the world, and you can have ingredients that are more numeric, like data. You can have ingredients that are more emotional, like stories, but they all connect, right? I mean, a data set is a collection of thousands of stories, and sometimes those individual stories that can be inferred from the data. Other times they're a bit more invisible, but for me, it's all about understanding the world.
Of course. And does it ever get too complicated and maybe a bit overwhelming?
Definitely.
Definitely. Well, I've got a clip I want you to listen to because there are so many definitions out there. Let me see what you think on this.
Data is gold. We have gold miners mining for gold, and so we have data miners mining for the value in data. And therefore, there is a gold rush underway.
My favourite metaphor for data is that it's like roads. And I reject all these metaphors to do with oil and gold and things that you can extract that naturally occur in the ground, because actually data is stuff that we choose to build.
Which perspective do you take?
Well, it's interesting. I guess my perspective is very much around visual storytelling with data. So Flourish, just to give some context, the company we set up, I guess, approaching 10 years ago in terms of aligning the ingredients that led to its creation, is a visuals platform. It's a visualization platform for taking data and turning it into charts, maps, and interactive experiences. So for me, I always think of data as being an abundant resource, but that it takes on its values. It takes on value when you shape it and turn it into something that people can make sense of. So there's what's the data, but then there's also what you do with the data. In fact,
so you're kind of a combination of both.
So I guess a bit of both. In fact, the company that Flourish grew out of was called Kiln. And the way that we described that was, data is like clay. It's everywhere. It's under the ground. It's where you can think of it being wherever you want. but it only becomes useful when you shape it, you glaze it,
and turn it into something. Yeah, you give it meaning.
Exactly.
Yeah, completely. So when you were at The Guardian and you were reporting on stories and you were sort of getting to the root of that data, what was it about that process that you wanted your reader to take? What did you want the reader to take from what you were presenting to them?
So it depended on the story, of course, but often, I mean, I was focusing a lot on climate change and energy at the time, and they're these sort of big, sprawling topics which are quite hard to sort of grapple with.
And can go over people's heads.
And they very, very often go over people's heads. Just to give one example, we did a piece around the new IPCC report, which came out, and it was projecting temperature rises in the future. But we found that actually, if you just tell people, well, in 2050 this will happen, and 2060 this might happen, then it becomes very abstract and hard to engage with. So we made an interactive visualization where you could start by putting in your year of birth. It then told the story of climate change, what had happened in your lifetime. And of course, for most of us adults, and most of the climate change that's happened so far, it's actually happened in our lifetime. And then projects forward when you're this age, when your kids are this age, and that just personalizes it. So that's just one example where we were trying to take a kind of quite abstract data set and just make it a bit more possible to connect with.
And then how did you make the leap from that to setting up your own? So you started with Kiln before Flourish.
So yeah, we were doing journalism at The Guardian, with visual journalism at The Guardian, with the in-house team. But I just found more and more that the things that excited me were the more adventurous ideas of what you could do. This was a time when the web was just opening up because old web browsers like IE7 were being retired. So suddenly you could do stuff with interactive SVGs. Like, this new technology was becoming something you could use in a mainstream publication.
Yeah, much more commonplace. And the user understood it too.
Exactly. And so in that context, we just, we being myself and my co-founder, Robin, he'd actually built the original Guardian website about 10 years before and had gone off and done a maths PhD and other things. And we started experimenting with how far you could push the boundary of interactive presentation of data on the web. And it started really more as a side project, and that was the Kiln brand. And it grew into something almost like a micro agency. People would write to us and say, can you help me with this project? But throughout that whole time, we were thinking, we're running this almost like a sort of cottage industry where we're making these things in a very bespoke way. And it would be amazing to democratize that and to allow anyone to do advanced storytelling with data. So that was the origin of Flourish.
And what was it like stepping into the unknown? Because had you ever had your own business before that, or you'd always worked for companies?
I had always been employed before then. I mean, there was a bit of a transition in the Kiln era because I think there was a long period where I was phasing out from the Guardian. I think I went from 5 days to 4 days to 3 days, 2 days to 1 day. So it wasn't too stark, that step into the unknown. I guess the bigger, starker step was when we decided to properly pivot it into a product company. We then did a VC fundraise and started hiring. So that was a step into the unknown, but I found it exciting rather than stressful. I think that's partly a personality thing, probably.
Okay, all right, I like that. Now, we've throughout the series, we're talking to lots of trailblazers who've sort of stepped out of their comfort zones, but also who defied expectations. What's interesting about your story is you don't come from a traditional tech background, and we know what the tech industry can be like. It's sort of, are you a coder? Have you done this, etc., etc. So did you ever feel that you didn't belong?
Not really.
Oh, really? How interesting.
I mean, I guess it was an unusual experience because
it wasn't the traditional route for you.
It wasn't the traditional route, but I was lucky to be working with a very, very technically gifted co-founder. I mean, exceptionally gifted.
Yeah. Maths PhD.
Maths PhD, but also that unusual combination of maths PhD with really, really battle-worn kind of like real-world engineering skills.
Yeah.
And so in the early days of the company, before we really turned it into a startup, it was almost like a sort of apprenticeship of sorts. I was the kind of commercial one and the product one. But in the background, I was actually learning to code and very much under my co-founder's sort of mentorship. And so looking back, I realized what a privilege that was. And maybe people can get that kind of apprenticeship now more with AI. But at the time, again, just goes back to being very curious. I loved the acquisition of those skills. Felt a bit like becoming a sort of ninja and suddenly having these superpowers. And if anything, like, you know, in the process of growing the company and realizing that there's a point where the kind of commercial co-founder has to stop coding
and start commercializing.
Yeah, exactly. So I was always doing both, but I found it quite hard to let go of that hands-on making things. I think a lot of founders are kind of makers, and they find it hard to let go of that.
And then how did you go through the sort of the whole monetization part when you had to then become the sort of commercial brain, as it were?
Well, it was interesting because we launched a product that we had a fairly good insight into the market for, because we'd been running this agency where people were coming to us and saying, well, I've got this budget for a custom project. And we realized that, you know, if you could turn that into a product, that for every company we'd work with, there must be thousands of others with similar budgets. So we, rather than doing the just mass market, low cost model, we kind of immediately started appealing to enterprises. And in that context, we were able to break even quite quickly. So I think we did a fundraise, but we'd hit profitability within about 18 months, 2 years. And we were also just quite cautious about spending the money we'd raised. I think some founders are very gung-ho and they're kind of growth at any cost and high risk, high return. We were a little bit more cautious. I don't know if that's because I grew up in Yorkshire or if it's more just that we were a little bit older than the classic tech founders. But we always had the idea that we would run it like a proper business and we try and get to profitability early. And so that made the commercialization quite easy in a way.
Brilliant. Now, we've been talking a lot throughout the series about, you know, who has your back, you know, who is it that you go to in a moment of crisis or when you're feeling unsure. So who did you go to during that time? Because I'm sure there must have been moments of doubt when you're moving into something completely different.
I guess everyone has a sort of network of different types of relationships. Obviously, you have a very close relationship with a co-founder. And depending on what stage of the business, that can be, you know, more therapeutic or more collaborative. And then
combative.
I mean,
that too.
I generally find that just close personal friends are the best sounding board because they understand the work in the context of your life a little bit more. But we were also lucky to have really thoughtful investors. We did our raise with Local Globe in London and Founder Collective in the US.
I know those guys.
And they're just both really great founder-friendly firms who, you know, they develop a nuance for understanding
the founder journey.
Well, the founder journey and, you know, the sort of optimal outcomes for different founders, which are quite heterogeneous, really, I think.
Yeah. How do you motivate and inspire those around you? What's your leadership style like?
I don't know. I mean, I guess my approach generally is just quite high energy in as far as I tend to stay quite across a lot of detail, and I work quite long hours, which I sort of try and hide as best I can. But often I think just being across the detail of what people are working on means that you can talk to them properly about it, rather than just setting a direction and stepping back. It's a really difficult balance that between, you know, empowering people to get on with things independently and at the same time being across the detail enough to help them
be able to assist if need be.
Exactly, yeah. Totally. And I think all founders struggle with that a little bit.
I can do this.
Yeah. I mean, the Paul Graham Founder Mode article that went viral last year, I think was to a significant extent around that idea of the traditional model of running a big enterprise.
Well, it's like parenting, isn't it? It's like when to let go, isn't
exactly.
it? Yeah. You know, when do you step in and step back?
Very similar.
Very similar, apart from you didn't have them. So speaking of things that are going viral, of course, there's a lot of conversation around at the moment about DEI. And I know that at Canva, you guys are still sticking with it and very much on board in ensuring that your teams are as representative as possible. So I'd be interested, how do you bring those to the table who aren't there? and what's the sort of the mode that you take to try and bring in those different voices?
So, I mean, I guess the big picture context here is that Canva is genuinely seeking to fulfill its mission statement, which is to empower the world to design. And when you think of empowering the whole world to design, I mean, we currently have 220 million people using it every month.
Isn't that
which is just crazy.
And the company's been going for 10 years, right?
It's been going for 10 years, but I mean, when Flourish was acquired, I remember in the acquisition conversations, it was 40 then. So the rate of growth is staggering.
Wow.
And
what is the secret sauce to that?
well, the secret sauce is really about building a really good product that genuinely is useful for people, pricing it really fairly, and being very committed to a mission that is really at the heart of the company, which is really democratizing visual communication.
Which feeds into this wider conversation we're having around DEI.
Exactly. And so for us, you know, if you're seeking to empower everyone in the world to communicate visually, then you're not going to achieve that by having a company that represents a minority of those users. So, I mean, for us, we have a very kind of broad church approach to everything we do, and not only in terms of how we hire, but also in terms of how we see our user base, and just being present in almost every country in the world.
Well, before we started recording, was it the Philippines you were telling me that you have?
The Philippines, yeah, is heading towards 1 in 5 internet users using Canva every month.
Wow.
But actually, I mean, to be honest, here we are in Spain.
Yes.
The figure for Spain is about 1 in 7 now.
Of the Spanish population?
Of the Spanish population. Well, the internet using population.
Internet using population.
So yeah, approximately 1 in 7 Spanish internet users use Canva every month. And the figure in France is only a tiny bit lower, like 1 in 8.
Now, you're heading up the European operations. Does it change from territory to territory, or is it the same product everywhere?
So the fundamentals of the product are the same, in as far as, you know, our fundamental product values are about ease of use and everything being integrated into a single tool. I mean, the origin story of Canva is very much around design being fragmented and exclusive through expensive, complicated tools, and bringing them together.
And having to go to experts.
Going to experts, but also going to stock photo libraries, and then separately to font libraries, and then to a print service. And it became exclusive just by friction and expense.
How cumbersome it all was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so Canva set out to say, well, it shouldn't be that hard. It should be easy to use, and importantly, it should be integrated into a single tool. So you can design something, you can find the imagery you need, you can find the fonts you need, you can print, you can export, you can post.
And you can do it quickly.
And importantly, you can do it quickly.
Yeah, that's the beauty of your product, is it's so quick.
Exactly, quick and easy. And we have a very big commitment to our education users. And so when we make things, we try and make them easy enough for even a school child to use. But at the same time, we're very, very widely used, even in the world's biggest companies. I think 95% of the Fortune 500 use Canva now. So it's very much a democratizing general purpose tool that lots of different types of users get value from.
Obviously, Flourish was doing incredibly well, hence why Canva wanted to buy the company. But was it a mindset change for you from having run your own company with a team of, was it 30 people you said before?
It was about that big, yeah.
Yeah, to then come in to run the European operations of one of the fastest growing companies in the world. What was the mindset change you had to make to be able to step into that role?
When we first chatted to Canva about the acquisition, there were lots of things that just made it obvious that this was a really good match. And a lot of that came down to sort of values and culture. But also just the incredible momentum that Canva was gathering globally. And it was very exciting to be part of that. But one of the particular things, Canva was HQ'd in Sydney, as that's where it was originally founded.
Yeah, of course.
And so, you know, Europe was always a little bit of a, not a black spot in terms of users, like we had huge numbers of users in Europe, but there wasn't really that much of a team here at that time. And so there was a really interesting opportunity that I was excited about right from the beginning to turn Flourish into the seed of the UK operation. And there were other companies that had been acquired in Vienna and the Czech Republic and elsewhere. And so I guess, you know, it's all the same mindset in terms of trying to do something interesting, exciting, and useful. But there's definitely been a shift in terms of the day-to-day work.
And
which
the
is
speed of growth.
the speed of growth.
Yeah.
And but also just the scale of impact. And so that's been really exciting.
Totally. And has that been nerve-wracking at all? You seem pretty
Not
calm.
really.
Though.
I think
You're
I'm constitutionally
pretty chilled,
quite calm.
So Canva is definitely on path to becoming one of the world's most valuable companies. And obviously in 2023, you were on the Time 100's most influential companies list. Is there a lot of pressure with a business that has such a bold ambition? And obviously Europe is a key part of that growth.
I mean, there is a lot of pressure, but only really to keep up with the success we've had. I mean, I think every business has different sorts of pressure. Canva's been so successful that if anything, the only pressure is wow, how
how do you keep
this
that?
incredible momentum going. But the way that we've got here so far and the way that we will continue to grow is really by bottom-up community love. And, Canva, this goes back to what I was saying before, that Canva's product from the beginning has been designed to be genuinely useful. And a lot of people use it for free. Not everyone pays. We don't see that as just a route to them paying. It's also a route to them finding value and becoming evangelists for the product and the company. That extends through to, for example, the way we work with not-for-profits. There are now 700,000 not-for-profits and charities globally who we give Canva free to. And again, we see that as genuinely part of our mission to do good in the world. But it also creates 700,000 organizations worth of evangelists who love what we've decided to do there and help spread the word. So Canva, it's exponential growth, and it really has been exponential, almost just like literally an exponential curve in users. You get those curves when you have a feedback loop. And the feedback loop for Canva is around people encouraging each other to use it and just finding it useful.
Yeah, and saying, have you tried this?
Exactly.
Totally. Yeah. Now, Canva's quite unique in a lot of ways in that obviously it is a female co-founded business and a female CEO. It's from Australia and not Silicon Valley for a company of that size. And then it's also a company that unleashes people's creativity, but it's also an education tool. Now, the thing that's interesting about the VC and tech landscape is we know that so few companies that are founded by women ever get funded, and even mixed founder-led teams, which this one is, because obviously Canva is a husband and wife team, only 10.4% of funding goes to mixed founder teams. How do you think that influences the way this business is run?
It's a good question. I mean, I think that the thing that
or do you guys just don't think about it?
I mean, I don't think we think about the gender aspect specifically in that way.
Right.
I mean, the thing that is really notable inside Canva, there are three founders. So there's Mel, Cliff, and Cam, all of whom bring a very different set of skills to the table. Mel is very much a sort of product visionary.
Yeah.
Cliff is an incredible sort of
and
can-do
she's the
operator.
Evangelist and the face of the company.
She's the face of the company, although, there's a lot of public outreach done by Cam and Cliff as well. And so one thing that I think has really helped the company is that those three aligned on a very clear mission at the beginning. And then they've all remained there. And I think there is goes back to that Paul Graham founder mode thing we were just talking about. There's a very different feel in a company, and I think actually a different level of growth potential in a company that's founder-led. I think having continuity of mission, continuity of founders, and that general kind of shared commitment to values and mission make a huge difference in a company's growth.
So that beating heart is there throughout.
Exactly. And I think that has also been a factor in how Canva's approached acquisitions. So Canva has often acquired companies to bring additional sort of founder mindsets in.
You being one of them.
Me being one, and I'm one of many. And generally there's a sort of principle in the company of, like, one of our values is to empower others, which permeates right through to the product in terms of empowering our users, but also internally in terms of empowering people to take on new briefs and, anyone who can move the needle, that should be embraced.
Yeah, totally. So there aren't as many female-led companies as we would like to see in the world for all sorts of reasons. What are your thoughts on that? And do you think there's a different dynamic and dimension when you have a female-led business?
I think that the interesting thing for me is around just creating opportunities and removing barriers. We've done quite a lot in the different wings of Canva globally, and we're really trying to ramp that up. You know, we've got an exciting partnership with Women in Tech at the moment. But we're also just trying to be creative about making sure we're expanding the pool rather than just sort of fishing more aggressively in it. And for example, we've experimented with creating paths into engineering roles for women who clearly have engineering instincts and abilities, but maybe it's quite hard to clear the time to sort of retrain. And so where someone shows particular skills and promise, like trying to create a path that maybe is a little bit softer and more accessible, so that you're not always asking people to take a kind of major leap.
Yeah. What's been your experience in terms of working in homogenous teams, both in terms of obviously background and gender, and then working in much more diverse teams?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just going through school applications for my second kid at the moment, and my daughter went to girls' school, and of course girls schools do way better than mixed schools or boys' schools, and boys' schools do the worst. Yeah. But no, I think that diverse teams do feel different. I think for me, it's a lot about like the impact you're trying to have on the world. Like if you're trying to create a tool like Canva is that is useful for everyone, then
you need everyone in
the room. Yeah. Exactly. And that applies to all aspects of a company, from like how you describe it through to like where the buttons are and what they do. Like it's both the sort of tactical concrete stuff and the intangible branding stuff.
Yeah. Do you think that obviously when we're looking at the success of a company like Canva and you know the fact that there isn't enough female-led founded business, do you think that a company like that makes it easier for the next generation?
I think in all aspects of life, role models.
What does the data say?
It's a good question. I'd have to look it up. But yeah, I think that there's no doubt that role models are really important in all aspects of culture. Yeah. But I think also, you know, if you think of the role that Canva plays in creating opportunities for people, it's not just about what the leadership looks like. It's about things like creating a platform that allows people to access creativity. Yeah.
And
one
the
of the things
SMEs that have been created of the back of it, all
absolutely.
Of that. Yeah, the cottage industries that have been created.
Totally. That thing of like starting a business, which used to be a very exclusive thing, you know, if you can create a brand, you can create your pitch deck, you can create your social posts. The more that is democratized, the more that people have routes to fulfilling their ambitions. And it's interesting that you mentioned the education play, because yeah, we have, I think the stat is now 80 million teachers and students use Canva every single month, and so we give Canva free to schools. And again, we get this incredible feedback from kids as well as from professionals in big companies saying, I feel really empowered by the fact that you've made it possible for me to do this, for me to create
and
this.
There's no barrier to entry.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I'd like us to loop back to the sort of earlier part of our conversation and look at your work and your early work in terms of climate data and what's happening in terms of the way the world is changing and the fact that the climate issue is almost being taken off the global agenda. The discussion seems to have sort of died down somewhat. Do you think that in a way, because the data can be so frightening and so terrifying, that people have almost become numb to it and have almost sort of not deluded themselves, but it's almost like they don't want to look at it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's really about the data as such, so much as just the nature of the problem. I mean, climate change often gets described as a wicked problem, meaning it's a problem that has aspects of collective action problem. It's quite abstract. It's very long term, and humans by nature discount the future quite heavily.
Yeah, especially to your earlier point when it seems so far away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, in terms of, fundamentally, it's a regulatory problem. I wrote a book about climate change where the core argument was that if you think of it don't think about emissions as a flow, think about the stock. We have all this fossil fuel. It's so valuable and it's so useful. Like liquid fuel is incredibly energy dense. It's fungible. It's just a very useful product. And the challenge we have as a society is leaving a lot of it in the ground. And there aren't many.
When we say, we could do stuff with this.
Yes, exactly. And not just we could in principle. We have all the infrastructure. We build more and more machines that need it. And so it's an incredibly hard problem. And there's also quite a high degree of uncertainty around all different aspects of how it will play out in the future. We're not completely sure how sensitive the climate is to CO2. We're not completely sure how the global biosphere will respond to increasing temperatures in terms of taking in versus giving out more carbon. So there are some big unknowns, but I think I completely agree that what felt very front of mind maybe 10 years ago, as the world has experienced more and more.
As the situation's got worse.
Well, as the situation has got worse, so has global politics become so complicated that we're maybe taking our eye off that particular existential ball. Yeah. And I really hope we get our eye back onto it soon.
Yeah. Whereas so many people sort of run away from data, particularly frightening data, you sort of run head into it. Where was that impulse?
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw just your comment that makes me think of a talk I saw recently by John Byrne Murdoch, the very brilliant data journalist at the Financial Times. And he was saying he's showing a study where if you say to people, the world is warming due to human CO2 emissions, and they look at it in terms of the American population, how many people say, I agree. And the majority, it was like half and half, I agree, I don't agree. They then did, for another control group, they did experts say that the world is warming due to and it moved significantly to the negative. So a lot of people, the second there's someone is telling me this, I don't trust it. And maybe that's partly an American cultural thing, but I think interesting generally. But then the third control group, they just showed a chart. They showed a chart of the global temperature going up and an adjacent chart of global CO2 emissions going up. And almost everyone said they agreed.
Right.
And so there's, I guess
when you could see the data for yourself.
Exactly.
Right, as opposed to someone else interpreting it for you.
Exactly. And so that's why I've always been interested in visualization and kind of storytelling with data, because it's not enough just to have some abstract concept that requires interpretation. You need to make it visible. We're fundamentally visual animals. I mean, that's what connects Flourish and Canva, really, that they're both about democratizing
visual tools.
Visual communication.
Yeah, very much so. I've got a clip I want you to listen to around data. Be good to hear what you think of this.
Declining trend in disaster deaths was really surprising to me. I'd thought that to be an informed citizen, I had to be watching the news all the time. That's how I kept up with the world. But when you watch the news, all you see is disaster, disaster, disaster. And if you'd asked me to draw the trend of what was happening to disaster deaths in the world, I would have said that they were at the highest level ever. And actually, when you step back to look at the data, it's the opposite.
That was Hannah Ritchie, data scientist Hannah Ritchie. How do we keep people informed and stimulate the right discussions?
I mean, communication is all about storytelling, really. It's about how making things relevant, making things interesting, and making things feel inclusive and ideally sort of non-partisan.
Yeah,
I mean, it's really interesting.
Which is really hard now.
It's so hard. And if you look at what happened with climate change in the US over the first 20 years of that debate, it became very quickly very politically polarized. And what psychologists call attitude polarization, where a thing becomes associated with identity, and then the more information you give, the more people just dig into their particular ideological
and
position.
Their positions, correct.
Exactly. And so that's a real problem. And I don't have the answers, but I think always trying to think about how any kind of message looks from the perspective of the audience. I mean, it sounds really obvious to say, but how is this going to be interpreted? Is this going to make people feel? And trying to be sort of sensitive to the different cultural perspectives that people are bringing.
And identities.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very much so. So with that in mind, how optimistic are you about the future and the potential for the world to change?
It's a really good question. I think I'm instinctively just quite an optimistic person.
Right.
Also,
You're a calm, optimistic person. These are good attributes, Duncan.
Well, maybe, except if I'm just persuading myself everything will be fine when it won't. But I mean, I've been through different waves of optimism or pessimism around climate change. I think my optimistic personality generally makes me think that there will be positive outcomes that are quite difficult to imagine. I'm very interested in the concept of feedback loops and the idea that things which seem like linear trends can change really fast when they're non-linear. Yeah. And it'll be really interesting to see how the non-linear response to climate change accelerates. Like if you get to a certain level of cultural acceptance of the problem, a certain level of investment moving away from fossil fuels, there's the potential to have a non-linear response where you get a self-perpetuating cycle. On the flip side, you have the climate has all these positive feedback loops where warmth can generate warmth. And it's almost like a race between those two feedback loops. And I feel like right now we're not focusing on it very much, but maybe at some point in the next 5 years that will start to change again.
Well, we might not have a choice.
We might have
it might just be that.
Could be as simple as that.
It's got to be as simple as that.
Or maybe AI will save us.
Yeah, maybe AI will save us. If I may, I'd like to bring us back to Canva and obviously you as an individual. There are quite a few parallels between you and the company in that, neither of you emerged from the tech establishment. If we're looking at that from the sort of diversity lens, how important do you think having different perspectives and diverse backgrounds and starts, how important do you think that is in terms of sort of creating a greater outcome, as it were, or as even as a recipe for success?
I think it's hugely important, especially if what you're trying to do is something that affects the whole world. I think, just to give one example, I think being outside of the US is probably a factor in the fact that most of Canva's acquisitions have been in Europe. And that's not to say that there aren't great companies to acquire in the States. Of course there are. But I think what happens in America a lot is that the world can seem a little bit boundaried by America itself. And of course, most of the people, most of the economic activity, most of the potential acquisitions, most of the potential customers aren't in the States. So I think starting outside of it, if you're going to have a genuinely global aim, is actually really quite helpful.
I agree. So with that in mind, what's next for Canva, and what's next for you, Duncan?
Well, we have some very exciting launches coming up at our big annual event, which we do every April. So there's tune in for Canva Create it's probably about 5 or 6 weeks now.
In Australia?
This one is in LA. So that's going to be really exciting. I can't tell you what will be launched there, but I can tell you it's going to be really great and really exciting. And it's very much based, as all our product development is, on listening to the needs of our
customer
audience.
Mm-hmm.
So that is coming up. I think other exciting things, for me personally, we have users all over the world. But for example, if you think of our time zone, you have this vast continent of Africa, which is the only place in the world with a significantly growing population.
Well, my family are from Ghana, so this is a passion point for me.
We have a very active Canva template community in Ghana. And one of the most amazing stats I read recently was that by 2050, 2 in 5 of the world's children will be in Africa.
100%.
Which is just so extraordinary. The average age is so young, and it feels very much like the continent that will define a lot of the next 50 years.
100%. And seeing as we're talking data and stats, can I give you one too?
Go for it.
By 2030, over 40% of the world's youth will be African.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for any business that's thinking about the future and new customers and a new workforce, there has to be an Africa strategy.
Totally, absolutely.
Well, you better tell us a bit of yours before you leave.
Well, again, I can't really go into too much detail, but
Will that come under you? You're Europe or you EMEA?
So I'm kind of overseeing EMEA. So we have exciting stuff happening all across that whole time zone. But it's also part of just a global picture. We've seen really amazing growth in the last year or two in Canva in Japan, for example. It's just a market that we hadn't focused that much on, but of course the need to communicate visually is really universal. And so when you have these big markets that have maybe just been not exactly ignored, but haven't been particularly focused on, then often the needle can move really quickly when you do focus on them. So that's an exciting part of the future for this time zone over the next year.
Brilliant. Well, before you go, I have just one question I have for you. So what is your tip for helping us all rewire, if you have one?
I would say rewire yourself visually. We live in the visual century. The importance of visual communication is going up and up. AI is driving that, but it's a trend that existed for much longer, ever since the printing press gave way to, I guess, much later social media. The expectation that we use our highly visual brains to express ourselves is more and more baked into all aspects of work life, education, and everything else. So, that's really the need that we're trying to meet at Canva.
Well, Duncan, thank you so much. It's been great talking to you. Congratulations on everything that you've done as an individual, but all the great work that you're leading at Canva as well.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, it's lovely to be here. Thanks for the chat.
Rewire. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Now don't forget to subscribe to Rewire so you never miss another episode. And please visit gsma.com for more research, thought leadership, and insights on inclusive leadership. Rewire.